Hello, my name is Colin MacDonald, and today I'm here to talk to you about our family farm, Sylvan Lake Farms, which was established by my great-grandfather in 1933. Today we're in our certified organic farm, and this is a little bit about our journey and how we got there. So this is the original farmhouse you're seeing in the cover shot for those who are curious what you're seeing. So as I mentioned, the farm was started by my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, Valmore and Catherine Forrest. So my great-grandfather was a full-time farmer. He worked at lumber yards. He was a trained carpenter. He managed lumber yards. And one day in 1933, he came to work at the lumber yard where he worked, where they were living in Saskatoon. And the boss said, you know, Valmore, times are tough. I'm going to have to ask you to take a pay cut. And he said, well, unfortunately, I got 5 kids at home and another one on the way, and I can't really afford a pay cut, so I'm going to have to go do something else. So they had heard about this quarter of land for sale. It was closer to some of their family. And they thought, well, they'd cash in their savings and buy the quarter of land. So they purchased the home quarter from the previous owner in 1933. And that's where the family has been ever since. So great-grandpa first owned land in the 1930s. And of the 6 kids, great-uncle Ken was the only one that was really interested in the farm. Apparently he just loved the farm, but unfortunately he was killed in a training accident, a plane crash over England during World War II, where he was an air navigator. And so he didn't come home from the war, and none of the other 5 kids had any interest in farming. So when great-grandpa finally pulled the pin on in his retirement on any farming and rented it out fully, that was the end of farming in the family until I came along. So the farm was rented out to some neighbors and came down to my grandmother, Margaret, and then subsequently when I was 6 months old, my mother inherited the home quarter. So I was raised on the home quarter, and it was rented out the whole time I was growing up, and I grew up on the neighbors' equipment. They'd been family friends since they arrived at this in the same year as my great-grandparents, and that's really where my love of farming began. So I would have loved to farm from the get-go. I mean, I grew up around it, and you couldn't really keep me off the equipment when it was farming season. But I didn't see an opportunity for it initially, just with a single quarter of land. And really on our home quarter, there's a lot of bush and a big slough, spring-fed slough, so there's really only 55 cultivated acres. And it's a little hard to go grain farming on that much land. But anyway, in 2016, I'd spent many years in the agricultural industry. I'd on and off through university, I'd worked on farms. I'd spent parts of 4 seasons, some full seasons and partial seasons on the US custom harvest run. I'd worked on farms and on the custom harvest in Australia. And then after university, I'd ended up going to work first for a John Deere dealer. And then I spent a number of years working for John Deere Corporate. And from there, I went to Honeybee, where I still work as the international sales manager, looking after all Honeybee header sales outside of North America. And when we had been transferred back from the US, where I'd been working at John Deere's Product Engineering Center in 2016, my mother gave me a big push and said, you know, I'd really like something more done with our land, because at that point it was sort of neglected hay. The neighbors had gotten too big to take much interest in it. It got hayed intermittently by anybody who was short on hay in a given year, and it was tired and needed something done. So I said to my mom, well, you can't really go grain farming on 55 acres, and I don't really have plans to be a market gardener. And she wasn't taking no for an answer. Some neighbors had some other land available that was also hay, and they felt needed breaking up and needed farming. My parents and these neighbors both wanted their land farmed organically. And I said, well, that's a little better, but I still need a bit more. And I happened to find about 15 miles from home another half section that had basically been let go for about 7 or 8 years that was for rent. But was going to need reclaiming, but at least to be certified right away. And I penciled the numbers for quite a while, and a few months, and realized I could probably get started on 500 or 600 acres of organic land. And so with that push from my mom, my wife and I took most of our savings and used them to start an investment in some equipment. And in the fall of 2016, we started farming. with a whole bunch of land to break ahead of us. So just to give you an idea of the farm today, so we're located, our home place is just a half-mile east of Henribourg, Saskatchewan. So you can see sort of about 30 kilometers north and slightly east of Prince Albert. And then my parents are about 10 miles to the northwest. You're more than welcome to look up on Google Maps and see exactly where we are with those land locations. So today we've grown to about 1,320 cultivated acres. We own 140 cultivated on 2 quarters, and then we rent about just under 1,200 more acres. And this fluctuates a little bit year by year. As I say, I'm the new kid on the block, so the big established farmers have all the good land, quote unquote, and we're left with the small bits and pieces that they don't want. So we have, I think, 1 quarter that's got 150 cultivated acres. We farm it almost corner to corner, just 1 slough and a few encroachments of other sloughs on the edges. And then after that, it drops pretty quickly. I think the next biggest piece we have is 127 acres, and we have bits and pieces that are as little as 10 and 15 acres. So it's pretty fragmented. We run around across about a 25-mile spread to farm those acres. And sometimes with short-term rental agreements, people come with tired hay land. Would you break it up for us and farm it for a couple of years and then seed it back down to hay for us? So we'll take on those things. But our goal is to maintain a land base between about 1,000 and 1,500 acres. And that's more than enough to keep me busy with half my year spent traveling for my off-farm job. So crops grown in no particular order. The staple in the rotation is probably the yellow flax. And then the red fife wheat. We grow oats, we grow 40-10 forage peas, yellow peas, green peas, red lentils, hemp, and barley. These are what we've grown. We don't necessarily grow all of them in every year. And green peas we probably won't grow again. Yellow peas opportunistically based on market. 40-10 is really the staple for us. Barley we've used in transition. We haven't grown organic barley, but when we've been transitioning other land. So, preparing to farm. As I said, in the fall of 2016, we started breaking land. And a Frontier was really a Kello built 24-foot breaking disc. You can see in the picture, breaking land. So that fall, and then some of this land that hadn't been farmed for a while. And as they say, the best laid plans of mice and men. So I went to work breaking land, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained. And so the result was we got 2 passes on my parents' home quarter, the 55 acres, and then we got about 40 acres a first pass. And that was it. We were shut down by the rain. And so we figured, well, we'll have a lot of breaking to do in the spring, and then we'll seed. So our first full year of farming was 2017. So in the spring, we went to work disking and breaking some more. After a lot of research through the winter and digging around, I found a drill that I thought was going to work really well for organic. So it's a John Deere 730, which is basically a field cultivator. You can see in the picture with a gang of double disc openers off the back, mounted on a rock shaft. So you're basically getting a quick field cultivating pass along with your seeding. I found one on 6-inch spacing. I wanted to go as narrow as possible. I feel that's the best chance of good weed control you have in organic outside of intensive in-crop cultivation. So I bought this drill and a cart down in Manitoba. They were one was at a dealership. The drill was owned by a farmer, and we married them up. And I took the tandem I bought that spring and towed them home from southern Manitoba. So part of my other past life, hauling oversized equipment, trucking throughout university, paid off to tow an oversized load home. So anyway, we fought a fair bit of moisture that spring, but did get about 300 acres or thereabouts, a little bit more than 300 acres broken, but late. And so by June, pushing up against the crop insurance deadline, we started seeding. I got about 175 acres of yellow flax seeded, about 45 acres of green peas, and then we're supposed to do another 72 acres of green peas. but there's a draw to get to that land. And even though we'd been able to get through and get it all disked and ready to go, we got the tractor and drill stuck trying to get to it. So in the end, we seeded just over 200 acres in that first year. And partway through seeding, or tillage ahead of seeding, the 9120 blew the engine. With only about 200 hours on it since we bought it. It was about 4,700 hours. So that was a big setback in a first year to have a $30,000 engine job and rental on a loaner tractor to be able to seed. But anyway, we got the crop in. And so in the fall, we didn't have enough acres yet to really justify our own combine. I found an opportunity to privately rent a combine from someone who had retired. So we did harvest the crop. It came off a little bit late. The yields weren't too bad, especially considering how late it was seeded. We were above the average for organic flax in the province and above the average on green peas, but unfortunately the green peas were bleached, so they'd been contracted and the buyer wouldn't accept them. The first little bit of flax, which was the bulk of it, went down to South Dakota to the processor for the US buyer who we contracted with, and it got there and they said it didn't match the sample, the color wasn't good, and they were going to reject it. So after a lot of back and forth, they agreed to run it through a color sorter again, and they accepted it, but with a big hit and charges for the color sorting and a loss of whatever wasn't good enough color for them. So that was a little bit frustrating. We had bleached peas sitting in a bin and the leftover flax because they wouldn't take any more than that, and red ink all over the balance sheet. So the accountant told us we were in the farm was insolvent, and I said, okay, well, we'll see what we have to do. We'll put some more cash in. We'd intentionally set up the farm as a corporation from the beginning so that it was separate from our personal, but we pour money in as need be. And we did get some financing from the bank, and we started making plans for year two and continued disking through the fall trying to get ready. So year two started a lot better than the first year. So we had just over 500 acres that we got in, sort of 150 acres of spring wheat, a little over 150 acres of peas, 65 acres of oats, a little over 100 acres of yellow flax. And I wanted to do an experiment to see how well we could do with lentils up here based on some seed trials and stuff that had been done in Alberta showing lentils a lot further north. Bought a cultivator to try to improve our seed bed preparation and our weed control, and away we went. And so we seeded what we could that spring, and things started quite well. So that fall, in August, we bought our own combine and header, and set to work harvesting what was a beautiful crop. You can see the oats here in the photo. We had beautiful oats that year, and really the rest of the crop was quite good. Unfortunately, the header on the combine had a massive failure after 10 acres and was out of commission for the rest of harvest. So we depended on a rented header for most of harvest that year. But the upside is the crops were really quite good. Harvest was a little tough. Weather wasn't all that cooperative, so we still finished in late October. After some rain and snow, we finally got the flax off. It finally froze hard enough to be harvested. The green peas had been bleached again, so we were sitting on 2 years worth of peas now because we weren't managing to find a market for them. But yet again, we beat the organic crop average that year for the province on every one of our crops, and had some quite good. And we made a little bit of money. The farm was just in the black. So we went to work breaking some more rented land that fall, added some land, and made our plans for year three. And so in 2019, our third year, we rented some more acres over the winter. We traded some equipment, which we seem to do every year. We added a high-speed disc for better residue management and seedbed prep. I hoped it would work well as a weeding tool and eliminate the need for a cultivator, but we found out pretty quickly that they don't replace a cultivator. They're good at chopping and sizing things, chopping up weeds, but they don't pull them out. And so you do still need a cultivator, but it's part of my goal to reduce tillage where I can and find less invasive tillage where I can. So that spring, we did actually even break some land again and seed it right away afterwards, stuff we managed to rent through the winter. We seeded more crops. We had over 700 acres that year. We strategically put in 40 acres of red lentils based on what had happened the year before. It looked promising on some lighter land. As you can see, we had some oats again, red fife wheat, tried some green peas again, and so a lot of 40-10 forage peas on some transition acres. So we had a pretty good diversity of crops, more acres, and things were going well. You can see a shot of lentils here. The lentils did really well. They were nice and weed free. And it was an early harvest in 2019. So the crop came off dry. Other than the green peas, yields were really good across the board. But for a third year in the row, the green peas were bleached and rejected on color. So now we were sitting on 3 years worth of green peas, which really causes some challenges cash flow wise. The lentils did really well. They went about 15 bushels to the acre, which for organic lentils I thought was quite good in northern Saskatchewan. But I looked at it and thought it's maybe not going to be a regular one in the rotation, because there are other legumes that we can make more money on and be more consistent on the yields up here. I think we got a little bit lucky on how well we did with them. And then the downside was there happened to be a glut of red lentils in the market that year, and so we're actually still sitting on those 600 bushels of lentils right now, trying to move those. Flax wouldn't dry down enough that year because we had such a nice warm harvest. So finally, we tried straight cutting a couple of times with an old pole type swather. We tried swathing. Couldn't get anything to work. So finally one morning in October, I made a phone call, and the next afternoon, sight unseen, swather, self-propelled swather was delivered by the dealership from a couple 100 kilometers away, and we went swathing. So we swathed the flax and picked it up, and then had a major failure on the combine with about 15 acres left. So we didn't actually finish harvest that year, but what we did get off was good. And the best news was we were really solidly in the black. So our projections were working out, our yields, we were hitting our yields or exceeding our yield projections. And it really looked like our recipe was working well, and farming was going to go well. So we'd also, up until then, been living out in Alberta, where I'd been last living with John Deere. And when I'd gone to work for Honeybee to find more flexibility for farming, part of the agreement we had was that we could move to the farm, but it would be up to us to move to the farm and to sell our house in Alberta, and I would work from home office in Alberta until we could move to the farm, and then home office at the farm when we were able to move. So we finally managed to sell our house in August of 2019, and the best part about that is the 500-kilometer commute to and from the farm was over. So we were moving back home to where we farm. We lucked out and bought what we figure is pretty much a dream property about 10 miles from where my parents live. You can see in the photos. So we're right overlooking a river valley. So the river's part of the boundary to our farm. Some nice rolling terrain and beautiful old barn that's part of the appeal of the property, and another expensive repair and maintenance project to save that heritage in the long term. But it was really nice to be settled in and start establishing the farmyard and being able to walk out the back door when we need to do stuff rather than get in the vehicle for a half-day drive. So going into our 4th year, we'd added more total acres, but we were trying to stretch out our rotation, get away from a 2/3, 1/3 crop and green manure, and move towards a 60-40 or even a 50-50 split, and just try and build the health of our soils and reduce how hard we're pushing things, but maintain the economic viability. So the spring started wet, really wet. So we had planned to seed about 800 acres in the spring. We shifted some plans around, looking at the condition of stuff and what land we would be able to get into and not get into. So right away, before we were seeding, we knew we'd be down to 750 acres or so that year. And then pretty quickly, we realized there was about 100 more of what we had planned to seed that was so wet we weren't going to get on it. So that was going to end up as unseeded acres. and crop insurance unseeded acres. So we're really down to about 650 acres to seed that year. So even below what we'd been the previous year. The other thing with the wet weather, it became apparent that we wouldn't be able to seed our red 5 wheat because it's about a 110-day variety, and we weren't going to get it in early May where we need to get it in. So we had planned, after a lot of encouragement from some friends who are hemp growers, to grow some hemp that year, and said, well, why don't we put the 150 acres in that was supposed to be wheat into hemp, and that way we're subbing a high value crop for a high value crop rather than going to oats or something, and hemp can be seeded late, so we should be okay there. So in the end, we seeded over 250 acres of hemp that year, some forage peas, some transitional barley on our new home quarter, and then about a quarter of flax, and we'd seeded experimentally some small acres the home quarter to winter wheat the fall before. So we had a lot of encouragement to try hemp, and we had some stubble ground and some pea stubble and some flax stubbles. We felt we'd have enough fertility to do the hemp there, and then it rained, and it rained and it rained and it rained, and it had rained right into June, but we'd already bought a lot of expensive hemp seed. And I figured we just needed a window to get the crop in, and we got the window, but it was the day after the crop insurance deadline, which is 10 days earlier for hemp because it's still a new crop category. But I thought, well, rather than putting 100 or 200 plus acres of oats and buying more seed in, I'd take a gamble and we'd seed the hemp. It's a short season crop. It's been seeded as late as the 1st of July in this part of the world and done just fine. So I thought, well, we should be good. So we got it in, and the 12th and 13th of June, and 11th to 13th of June, I guess it was. And then it rained and it rained and it rained and it rained, and the one quarter, 150 acres, came up. It was weedy. It was crusted over. It had had 3 to 4 inches more of rain on it when it was already saturated and muddy when we seeded it. And it was so bad that our best choice was to plow it under. So all of a sudden we had 150 acres of uninsured hemp plowed under. And then on the other quarter with 113 more acres, it was probably 20% of it was drowned out, not worth harvesting, and the rest was varied from somewhat decent to rather poor. Our pea field that year was so wet that I got the land roller stuck just trying to pull it into the field. So eventually, about a month later, we were able to take it back out, but we never did roll the peas. When I was trying to get the land roller unstuck, the soil was squelchy under my boots. And as you know, peas don't like to have their roots wet. So that was the beginning of another wreck. The winter wheat had been winter killed in some places and was low on nutrients, so the weeds got ahead of it. It was pretty discouraging. The good news was the flax. That was our savior that year, and seems to be the crop that does well every year. Had a beautiful crop of flax, the best one we'd ever had, and so that's where we did well. But by the end of harvest, we knew there was going to be red ink all over the balance sheet. We generally beat the organic averages just barely. So not enough to get a claim on insurance on the peas. The winter wheat wasn't insured, the hemp wasn't insured. So it was a good note to self, always take crop insurance and don't seed something after the deadline that's high value and risky. But anyway, we figured, oh well, we'll see how we make out. So a little bit more financing. The accountant said to us, don't be too discouraged, because even in a poor year, we're still making payments, we're still building equity in things. And we had made a plan to trade drills, and we went ahead with it anyway. The goal was to try and separate tillage from seeding. So I had seen this new Bourgault drill that was being introduced into the market, and was the first one in Canada to buy one. I thought it fit really well with organic farming. It's a no-till disc drill on 6.5-inch spacing, and we just spent so much time keeping our 30-year-old drill in good repair, and the downtime and the cost, that we figured we'd be just as far ahead or further ahead by making the payments on a new drill. So spring was early. We got a lot of preceding tillage done, and we had high hopes for the season. Off we went. This was our biggest year yet in terms of acres. So we had about 150 acres of red fife wheat in. That was the first thing we seeded. We were seeding as early as we ever had. We were seeding by the 10th of May. Put almost 150 acres of flax in, the better part of 400 acres of oats, almost 100 acres of hemp, about 80 acres of yellow peas, about 120 acres of 4010 forage peas. All of this by now on certified land. Our home piece that's still in transition, we seeded down to alfalfa this spring. And then we were doing some custom, about 100 acres of custom seeding for a neighbor, custom farming for a neighbor. And then this year we waited for rain, and we waited and we waited and we waited, and we didn't get any. And then we got just enough to get things going a little bit. And then the problems really began. What we found is the new drill we'd bought wasn't well suited to tilled soils, and we'd been fighting all through the spring, reducing packing pressure, trying to get it to throw less dirt. But most of what we seeded, the second rank started burying the first rank. So we had shaky emergence on one row and partial emergence on the other row. And it was exacerbated by the dry weather. So the drought conditions were compounded by that. So the dry year made for an easy harvest, and a lot of the crops still looked pretty good, but didn't have much in them. So our red fife wheat was about 2/3 what we had produced in the past and what we were hoping for. Our oats were about 25 to 30% of normal. They were on our lightest land and absolutely fried by the weather, and the worst piece got hailed on top of droughted. Our 4010 peas and our yellow peas were about half of normal. And then the second year of growing hemp, we were about 30% of our conservative target. And unfortunately, that was heavily due to the results of poor emergence from the drill. And this last thing seeded, we had our packing pressure backed right off. We had very little moisture left, and we just didn't get good germination, and a lot of seed was buried too deep. So that was a big blow, especially when crop insurance on hemp is based on conventional pricing, not organic pricing. And the biggest blow, I guess, was the first year our flax failed us. We were waiting to harvest it. We finally tried at the end of October, because we'd had stuff that by late September we had regrowth that was flowering. We still had bolls that were green. We had others that rubbed out to dust when you grab them in your hands. And so we tried harvesting. And we did one pass, and it was too wet to harvest and averaging less than a bushel to the acre. So that one was a crop insurance write-off this year. So what have we learned so far after years like that? I've always wanted to farm, and if somebody had put 2,500, 5,000 acres of conventional land behind me and the backing to farm it, I would have happily gone farming conventionally. I come from a family that has organic leanings. Mom wanted her land farmed organically. The neighbors who had land for me wanted the same thing. So I chose to farm organically, and that was the opportunity we had. And I realized pretty quickly that what we've accomplished so far, and what's relatively a shoestring budget, wouldn't have been possible conventionally. We started on 500 acres and were able to buy the equipment we needed to make it work and cash flow it. With a relatively modest initial investment, even though we've added some more money over the years. But that wouldn't have been possible conventionally. We would have needed at least 5 times the land and a lot more money and a lot more backing. And I've never really been comfortable around chemical. So, I had the leaning to go that way anyway. And now looking back, I just can't imagine doing things any differently. We're far more profitable. I think generally what we're doing is better for the land, although I have some reservations on some aspects of what we do. I think it's better for our kids, it's safer, there are just a lot of benefits. However, as I mentioned, they both have their challenges, organic or conventional, neither one's perfect. But we do believe, as I said, that, organic can be better for our family, our community, our environment, and especially the financial health of our farm. On the flip side, we own 6 different tillage tools, and I wish we didn't own any. We have a field cultivator, a chisel plow, a high-speed disc, a heavy disc, tine weeder, heavy harrows, and we seem to endlessly be doing tillage of one kind or another, even though we're trying to reduce it. And to me, that's the biggest downside and challenge of organic farming. Tillage is so hard on soil, and it's so hard to reduce it in organic farming, but that's our goal at all times. We don't have any livestock. We do have plans in the future, especially down the road when I hope to shift away from working off farm to full-time farming to incorporate livestock, because I believe for organic farms to be truly regenerative and long-term sustainable, we need to have livestock in the mix. I think all farms, and in particular organic farms, are going to have to be mixed farms in the future to make agriculture last and be sustainable and productive in the long term. So a little bit about what I'd say our best practices are, what we've learned. Seed early and heavy. You can see what our seeding rates are. They're very heavy. And so far, I've never found us in a situation where we've ever seeded too heavy. So I feel like seed is one of your cheapest forms of insurance on getting a good crop. In fact, with the lentils, the year we did the 40 acres of lentils, we had a meter roll sensor acting up on the drill, and the first 10 or 15 acres got seeded at about double what was already a high rate. And I would seed at that rate if we did lentils again, because that area we had lentils that were averaging 30 to 35 bushels to the acre, although the 40 acre average ended up being about 15 bushels. But seeing how well that heavy stuff did, there's one where I don't think you can ever seed too heavy. The earlier we've seeded, the better the crops have been without exception. So I'm a big believer in seeding early. If you're on narrow spacing, I think you'll outcompete the weeds. I think waiting until late May, which a lot of organic farmers around me do, to try and get a kill on the weeds, I think you lose yield potential and you can beat the weeds in other ways. Always take maximum on your crop insurance. It's saved us a lot of years, and it's certainly going to save us this year. I'm sure farming next year. I think narrow seed spacing is one of the best things we do, and always experiment. Do an experiment of some kind every year. You're always learning. There's always opportunity to try new things. If it's a different rotation, if it's tweaked to how your rotation is, a different crop, a different tillage practice, a different seeding practice, experiment, experiment, experiment. What else have we learned? Pick crops that suit your land well. We did well, as I mentioned, with lentils one year, but I don't trust them to be a good one in the long term in our area. I would say always choose crops that are competitive with weeds when possible. For example, we grow a lot of 40-10 forage peas. They fit well as a legume in our rotation. We have a good local market for them, but they're also far more competitive with weeds than any other peas we can grow. Sometimes yield potential is more important than price. I always struggle with this with oats. There are a lot of volume to handle, and the price relative to other crops that we can grow is quite low. But our oats are always high quality and always high yielding. Even this year in a drought year, we had good milling oats that were testing up to 45 pounds compared to a 34-pound test weight for oats. So they might not look like they're worth as much on paper, but sometimes these higher yielding crops actually do better in the end than the lower yielding, higher dollar crops. As I said, experiment every year. Be ready to store grain for a long time. That was something going into the organic world I had no idea of. I just thought, well, we'd grow the crop, and 6 months later it would all be, 6 months after we seeded it, it would all be sold, and away we go. But I find in organic, sometimes you like the price, but there's no market. Whereas in conventional, you may not like the price, but you can always move it. So we've had to sit on some crop for 2 and 3 years before we've been able to sell it, which, especially as a startup farm, makes cash flow really challenging. Find local markets if and when you can. Develop those relationships. I'm at the point where very little of my crop goes any further than Saskatoon or Yorkton, and some of it goes even closer. I like dealing with the local buyers. I have a relationship with them. We help them, they help us. A little bit about our future plans. This is a sample of what we are working into in terms of a long-term crop rotation. trying to get the right balance of fertility, weed control, and profitability, trying to eliminate as much as possible any years where you're not generating any revenue off land, but still maintaining soil health, soil fertility, and rotation purposes. We're also making some plans to do some alley cropping at home, where we'll plant trees and bushes and stuff for pollinator habitat and farm in between those in an effort to protect some high and erodible land. And then incorporating livestock and some other things like that are in our long-term plans, and reducing tillage as much as we can. So a quick little bit about the equipment we use and why. So the pictures, as you can see, we've got with my background having trucked, I have the license, so we do have a truck and trailer on the farm. And it allows us the flexibility to get a little bit of a price premium and haul grain ourselves, at times get paid for the trucking, which I'm happy to do if and when I have the time for it. And it also allows us to move lots that are smaller than a B train load, but otherwise sometimes we'd be waiting on a buyer to organize a split load or paying dead freight or things like that. So I find the ability to move my own grain to be fairly valuable, even though most of our stuff is still picked up FOB on the contracts we make. The heavy braking disc, that one's been critical for getting all the hayland broken, and it's also given us opportunity to rent it out and do some custom work, which is always great for cash flow on the farm. You see the ST21 swather, that was one test swather from work that I was using this fall, but it's why I have the tractor with the front hitch and front PTO. We always need to have a swather on the farm, because although I'll straight cut it anytime I can, sometimes we do have to swath, but I'd rather not have another power unit sitting around in the yard for the odd year I use it. So having a tractor set up with front hitch and front PTO allows me to have a swather on the front, and gives us more flexibility with a tractor that can do other things. Once you've got that, it's awfully nice to have a big snow blower, and you find other things that'll go on the front of the tractor. So with the air disc drill from Bourgault, I still believe there are a lot of things that work really well on it. Bourgault's trying to figure out whether they can make it work in our tilled conditions, but we don't know where that's going to go. We may end up with a different drill for next year. I believe that one of the most critical pieces to doing a good job on the organic farming is seeding. We don't have fertilizer, we don't have a chemical to cover up for problems in seeding. So we have to do a good job of seeding, and that's where I think the biggest investment often needs to be made on organic farming is good seeding equipment. And within that, narrow row spacing to me is critical. So if this tool doesn't work, we'll end up going and looking at some of the other options I looked at and making them work. The air flex on the combine, I've used the flex drapers a couple of times, been able to use ones from work. We have an auger flex header and a rigid draper on the farm, but we find having a flex header of some kind is critical, is crucial for all the peas we do, the occasional lentils and so on, but we want the speed of a draper for harvesting cereals and stuff like that. So to me, in the long term, a flex draper covers all the bases on a header. The heavy harrows, sizing everything the right way. So we went with the Elmers, not necessarily because they were the top choice, but they were at the time the only ones who built 30-foot heavy harrows, so it fit with the size of what we need for our farm. The high-speed disc is again sort of fitted to the size of our farm. The tine weeder, it's a 30-foot. It gives us an opportunity to do some weed control, and also great for small seeding. It's got the P box on it, which is like a Valmar, and allows us to seed cover crops and forages and things like that, and get weeding passes when we need to in crop, even to fairly late stage on some crops. And then the field cultivator is probably one of the key pieces of tillage equipment for weed control that we can choose to use or avoid using as we need to. I think probably one of the biggest things that I find is we use a lot of European equipment, relatively speaking, or European influenced equipment, and I think it's really important to look outside of North America, I have the opportunity, because I travel and I see equipment all over the world, for solutions, because often European equipment is sized and designed to work better in tillage or semi-tilled environments, and scaled to European farms, which are often closer in size to North American organic farms. So don't be afraid to look for equipment here, there, and everywhere to make a system work. So to conclude, why do we do this? I'm following my farming dream. I've wanted to do this since I was a kid. You know, my wife, my mother tell me I'm happiest, and they're probably right, when I'm sitting in the tractor out walking in good crops. You know, we can't really imagine a better place to raise our kids. I mean, they've got a playground all around them. When I'm at home farming, they can come to the office on any day, not just on take your child to work day. You know, we get to enjoy the beauty of the world every day. I mean, you look around us, you look at the photos in the background here, and it doesn't get much better than that in my mind. And we think this is the best opportunity we have to maybe leave the planet a little better for future generations. If we can improve the health of the little piece of land we have, the world should be better off. So thanks for listening, and feel free to get in touch with me if you want to know more about our farm.